They thought the satellite outage was global, but the truth was worse. A convoy vanished without warning. The world's eyes went blind, and every modern aircraft turned back, except one pilot, flying an A-10 that didn't need the sky to see. You're watching Warthog Valor Stories. Before we begin, tell me where in the world you're watching from, because this mission starts with the entire planet going dark. The first warning didn't come from the ground. It came from orbit. One moment, the global satellite network streamed flawless imagery across the operations center. The next, every screen blinked, stuttered, and collapsed into a wash of static. Technicians tried to recover the feeds, typing commands with rising urgency. Nothing responded. Icons froze, maps vanished, data links died one after another like falling dominoes. Within minutes, the room shifted from organized routine to controlled panic. Commander Hale stepped forward, voice sharp. "Report, what exactly did we lose?" A technician turned, pale. "Sir, everything. All satellite imaging has dropped offline." "Regional?" "Sir, global. It's a full blackout." The room fell under a stunned silence. No one had ever seen a total failure. No weather pattern, no solar flare, no known system flaw could collapse the world's entire overhead view at once. Before anyone could process it, a second alarm triggered. This one was personal. An army convoy moving through a remote desert canyon had gone silent mid-transmission. No GPS marker, no distress beacon, no drone overhead. Their last fragment of audio cut off in the middle of a sentence. "Did we lose them because of the satellite failure?" Hale asked. "We don't know, sir, but we can't locate them. At all." Hale's jaw tightened. "Then launch air assets, anything that can fly." Jets scrambled, F-16s lifted off. 2 reconnaissance helos followed, but they all returned almost immediately. Instrument failures, terrain warnings, navigation collapses. "Sir," a pilot said upon landing, "the canyon system is unreadable. Without satellite mapping, it's a blind maze. Every jet would crash before finding that convoy." Hale muttered, "So who can fly something like that?" The room went silent again. Then the door opened. Major Aria Dunn stepped in, A-10 pilot, known more for results than conversations. Calm, focused, helmet under her arm, she studied the blank screens without a hint of fear. Hale caught her eye and raised a hand. "Dunn, don't even start. We don't know what caused this outage, and we don't know what's waiting in those canyons." Aria walked straight to the map table, even though the digital display was dead. "The A-10 doesn't rely on the systems the jets need. My hog can fly on analog if it has to. I don't need satellite imaging. I can read terrain the old way." Hale stepped closer, lowering his voice. Every aircraft turned back. Aria didn't blink. Every jet, not every hog. A technician spoke up, hesitant. "Major, the convoy's last ping came from a canyon that swallows signals even on a good day. With the grid down, we have zero visibility." "Then I'll fly where visibility doesn't matter." Hale hesitated, longer than usual. He wasn't worried about the aircraft. He was worried about her. "There's no backup area. If you get lost in that canyon network, I won't." Simple, steady, final. Minutes later, the A-10 sat at the end of the runway, engines growling in the orange haze of dusk. The entire base felt strangely muted without satellite data, like the world had gone blind. Aria climbed into the cockpit, sealed her helmet, and powered up the hog. The old analog gauges flickered to life, steady and reliable. When she lifted off, the sky had no guidance to offer. No eyes from above, no map, no feed. But the hog, with its old circuitry and stubborn heart, caught the whisper. She adjusted course by a few degrees and descended toward the canyon network. Without satellite support, the landscape below looked like a tangle of shadows and sharp ridges, a maze even experienced crews avoided. But Aria felt the terrain rather than trace it, reading the air pressure, the echo of wind against the fuselage, the subtle shifts in lift that told her where the walls tightened. The pulse flickered again, weaker but consistent. "Someone's trying to stay alive," she murmured. The canyon walls rose on both sides, narrowing into a corridor barely wide enough for the hog. Loose stone rattled down the cliffs as her engines sent vibrations through the passage. Aria dropped lower, using the remaining daylight to catch any glints of metal or broken patterns in the sand. She spotted the first clue at a bend in the canyon, an overturned truck, burned nearly to its frame, lying half submerged in a dry riverbed. Tire marks led toward the canyon mouth, but ended abruptly, swallowed by scuffed dust. Shell casings reflected a dull gold beneath scattered debris. It wasn't a crash site. It was an ambush. Aria banked left, following the trail of disturbed sand. The pulse returned, short, quick, pointing deeper into the narrowing cut. She descended into the tighter section, wings almost brushing the rock as she threaded through a natural stone arch. The hog growled in protest, but she kept her movements smooth, steady, precise. Back at the base, the operations center remained blind. Commander Hale hovered over dead screens, waiting for anything. A sound, a flicker, a message. Nothing came. "If she's seeing anything out there," he said, "it's on instinct alone." Inside the canyon, the pulse strengthened. 3 rapid clicks, then silence. Aria rounded a final corner and saw flashes ahead, not reflections, gunfire. She dropped instantly to low flight. Bullets sparked off the canyon floor as she angled for visibility. Figures scrambled near a cluster of boulders, the missing convoy soldiers pinned behind scrap metal and shattered rock formations. Above them, hostile fighters moved along the high ledges, using elevation as cover. The team had nowhere left to run. Aria steadied the hog. No sensors, no radar, just eyesight, instinct, and the GAA-8. She dove. The hog's engines roared through the canyon like thunder trapped between stone walls. The GAA-8's firing vibration shook loose dust from the cliffs as rounds tore across the ledges, shredding the first enemy positions in violent bursts. Rock fragments rained down. The pinned soldiers flinched, then looked up in disbelief as the tide turned within seconds. Aria pulled up, engines howling as she skimmed the canyon rim. The pulse on her receiver spiked again, too strong to be the same weak distress signal. Something else was transmitting. She banked right, trying to reacquire the source. A flash appeared on a ledge to her left. Not gunfire, not equipment. A metal object, half buried in stone, blinking at irregular intervals. A transmitter. Not theirs. Someone had planted a device in this canyon, something strong enough to disrupt communications long before the satellites failed. And as Aria turned back for another pass, the ledge beneath the device began to crack, sending the entire rock shelf sliding toward the trapped soldiers below. The rock shelf broke with a violent snap that rolled through the canyon like thunder trapped in stone. Aria saw the entire ledge tilt forward, carrying dust, debris, and the blinking transmitter with it. The slab was falling fast, too fast for the pinned soldiers beneath it to escape. Aria didn't climb. She dove, She forced the hog downward, pushing the throttle until the engine spat a blast of pressure across the collapsing stone. The shockwave caught the slab at an angle, shifting its fall just enough. It smashed into the canyon floor, inches short of the soldiers, throwing a storm of dust over them, but sparing their lives. When the haze thinned, the transmitter sat exposed on the broken rock. It was still blinking, pulsing in irregular beats like a mechanical heartbeat. Up close, it looked wrong. Crude metal plating, mismatched wires, a power cell strapped with bolts. This wasn't military hardware. This was built by someone who understood exactly how to disrupt a battlefield and who expected aircraft to come searching. Aria's receiver twitched again. A second pulse, stronger, deeper inside.
She banked left and followed it into a tighter corridor. The canyon narrowed until the hog's wingtips hovered only feet from jagged stone. She kept speed low, fingers making micro-adjustments on the stick, letting the aircraft ride the air pressure instead of fighting it. Around the next turn, she saw the telltale signs: fresh blast marks, scorch patterns, boot tracks that didn't match the convoy, pieces of equipment dragged along the sand. This wasn't a random ambush. It was staged, planned far in advance. Gunfire erupted from a ridge above. Rounds sparked across the canyon floor as Aria rolled and dropped lower. Fighters on the cliff used the height perfectly, shooting down at the convoy and up at her in alternating bursts. Aria aligned visually, no sensors, no targeting, and dove. The GAU-8 answered with a roar that filled the entire canyon. The ridge shattered in a chain of explosions, forcing the fighters to retreat. Dust rose like smoke from a battlefield long forgotten. The survivors pointed frantically deeper into the canyon. Aria followed their gesture and spotted headlights bouncing between stone pillars. Another wave of hostile trucks, moving fast toward the trapped unit. She dropped to canyon floor altitude, lined up the lead truck, and fired. The GAU-8 ripped through it, sending metal flipping sideways. The trucks behind slammed into each other, blocking the path in a twisted barricade. But before she could climb, her receiver needle jerked violently right. Another transmitter, much stronger, close. Aria spotted it tucked beneath a high overhang, bigger than the first, wired with more power cells, pulsing with aggressive, deliberate frequency. And unlike the earlier device, this one wasn't aimed at communications. This one pushed directly against her aircraft. The hog dipped left as the interference washed over the cockpit. Not a natural gust, not canyon turbulence, a manipulated flight shove. The needle slammed again. The nose tilted toward stone. Aria corrected. The transmitter pulsed back. The hog lurched harder. Her breath tightened. This wasn't battlefield noise. This wasn't random sabotage. This was a trap designed to kill aircraft, specifically the kind that would come low, slow, and close. The kind of aircraft she was flying. The canyon walls blurred inches from her wingtips as she fought the pull. Another pulse hit. The control stiffened. The nose twisted offline again, this time much faster. She wasn't losing control. Something was taking control. Whoever planted these transmitters didn't just want the convoy hidden. They wanted the rescuing aircraft dragged into the rock and obliterated. And as Aria pulled with everything she had, the interference surged, sending the A-10's nose straight toward the canyon wall at lethal speed. The A-10's nose snapped toward the canyon wall so fast that Aria felt her entire body jerk forward in the harness. She hauled the stick back, muscles locking, forcing the hog out of the transmitter's engineered pull. Metal shuddered. The wings scraped a thread of dust from the rock as she barely cleared the impact zone.
She steadied the aircraft in the only open space left, an air pocket between two leaning stone towers. Her breath slowed. The hog groaned under her hands, alive but unsettled. That second transmitter wasn't jamming communications. It was pushing on her flight inputs, twisting the aircraft toward the walls like a magnet dragging metal. She found it seconds later, wedged under an overhang, blinking rapidly, aimed like a directional weapon. Not sophisticated, but deliberately positioned to strike low-flying aircraft. And it was working. The canyon ahead curved sharply. She couldn't destroy the transmitter on this pass without risking another forced skid. So she held altitude, dropped speed, and threaded the hog through the turn. Air shifted violently. Wind tunneled upward from a basin carved below, hot air rising, cold air plunging down, a natural trap amplified by the devices. The hog jolted upward, then sideways. Aria corrected fast. The aircraft slammed back into stable air just before the wind could clip a spire. For a moment, it felt like she was wrestling the canyon itself. But the basin opened into a calmer stretch, just wide enough to think. She banked, gained a thin margin of altitude, and circled into a firing line. The transmitter blinked at her from the ledge, pulsing like a taunt. This time, she wouldn't enter from the same angle. She swept in diagonally, minimizing the time she'd spend inside the interference zone. The aircraft trembled the instant she crossed the field, controls stiffening again. She ignored the fight, held steady for a half-second and fired a short burst. Stone shattered. The device disappeared in a spray of metal fragments. Silence hit the canyon. The interference vanished. The aircraft finally flew clean. On the ground, the rescued soldiers waved toward a blocked escape crack in the wall, piled high with debris. She'd have to clear that path, or they'd stay trapped until the enemy regrouped. Aria lined up for a low pass, using the GAU-8 to blast the obstruction into manageable rubble. Dust rolled over the survivors as the rocks collapsed away, opening their exit route. But the moment she climbed, she saw movement on the ridge, dozens of silhouettes shifting into position. This group wasn't carrying rifles. They were dragging something heavier, longer, unmistakably shaped like a launcher. The transmitters weren't the real threat. They were setting her up for the weapon now aiming straight at her. Aria pulled into a climb just as the ridge lit up and a missile streaked toward the hog's nose. The missile streaked off the ridge with a hard white flare, cutting a clean line through the dusty air. Aria slammed the throttle forward, pulling the hog into a climbing arc just tight enough to throw off the missile's lock. The canyon walls spun under her, rising and falling in a blur as she climbed into open air, anything to force the missile into a wider turn. It followed anyway.
She rolled left, then immediately right, trying to bleed the missile's energy without letting the hog slide back toward the ridgeline. The aircraft vibrated under the strain, its old airframe groaning as she pushed it harder than it wanted to go. The missile gained on her, the trail tightening with every second. Aria cut power for a heartbeat, dropped the nose, then punched the throttle again, a classic A-10 trick to shake pursuit. The missile overshot by meters, streaking past and slamming into a cliff in a violent flash that rocked the entire canyon. But she barely had time to breathe. More silhouettes appeared on the ridge, 2 launch tubes, maybe 3. Whoever these fighters were, they weren't just ambushing a convoy. They were prepared for aircraft, prepared for her. The survivors on the canyon floor were moving now, pushing toward the newly cleared escape path. They were close, but not close enough. If another missile hit, the blast would collapse the route she opened for them. Aria circled tightly, staying just above canyon height. If she climbed too high, she'd be an open target. Too low, and the ridgelines would hide incoming launches until it was too late. She stayed in the one narrow layer of air where she could see both threats, enemy launchers above and the survivors below. A new missile fired. This one launched low, angling toward her from a blind corner of the ridge. Aria rolled sharply, dragging the hog into a hard turn that forced the missile to cut across her wake. The A-10 wasn't fast, but it could survive turns that would rip apart a lighter jet. The missile corrected and came back around. She needed altitude, just enough to get a firing angle on the ridge. She climbed into a shallow peak, holding steady as the missile closed in. At the top of the arc, she rolled the hog belly up, locking eyes on the launcher position. She fired. A single GAU-8 burst tore across the ridge in a spray of dirt and flame. The launcher disintegrated, taking 2 fighters with it. The missile chasing her missed its final correction, spiraling downward into a rock pillar and detonating with a muffled boom. The canyon shook, stone fragments scattered down the walls. Not enough. More movement flickered along the ridge, fighters regrouping, pulling another crate toward the edge. She didn't know if it was another launcher or something worse, but the soldiers below were exposed, exhausted, and out of time. "Not letting you reset," she muttered. Aria lined up again, flying low enough for sand to spray off the canyon floor. The hog roared forward, the GAU-8 spooling into its familiar predatory hum. She sliced across the ridge, tearing apart whatever the fighters were preparing. The explosion lit the orange cliffside in silhouettes, scattering into the dust. Silence followed. Brief, trembling silence. She banked to check the canyon floor. The soldiers were almost at the exit. Almost safe. Her receiver twitched. One last pulse. A third transmitter.
Stronger than the others, hidden deeper in the canyon, not disabled, and its signal was rising rapidly. If that final device activated fully, the entire canyon could collapse into a death trap, blocking the soldiers in and dragging her hog out of the sky. Aria pushed the throttle to the stop and dove toward the signal, the last trap waiting for her in the dark. The final signal hit Aria's receiver like a hammer, sharp, rising, urgent. She followed it into the narrowest section of the canyon, the walls pressing so tight the hog's wingtips skimmed the shadows. The air felt wrong here, still, heavy, as if the canyon itself was holding its breath. Then she saw it. The last transmitter wasn't a small device like the others. It was a full-size cylinder welded into the canyon wall, wired deep into cracks carved by hand. This wasn't for jamming or misguiding aircraft. It was built to collapse the entire canyon. If that device overloaded, the survivor's escape path would vanish under tons of stone, and the hog wouldn't escape either. Aria dropped low, leveling out just enough to line up a firing angle. Immediately, the interference slammed into her controls. The left wing buckled downward, dragging her toward the rock. She countered. The transmitter pulsed again, stronger, trying to torque the aircraft sideways. She lowered even further, using the thin cushion of air between the hog and the canyon floor to stabilize the aircraft. The whole frame shook, warning lights blinked. The stick fought her grip. No more time. She squeezed the trigger. A tight burst of GAU-8 fire hammered the cylinder. Sparks flashed, metal split, and the power core blew inward, imploding before it could trigger the wired charges. The interference vanished instantly, leaving the hog suddenly light and responsive again. Aria pulled up, rising out of the canyon in a single clean arc. Dawn spilled over the ridgeline as she broke into open sky. Below, the trapped soldiers moved through the escape path she'd opened. Rescue teams converged now that the blackout had lifted. The canyon finally lay silent. No hidden pulses, no traps waiting to be sprung. She keyed her mic. This time the signal was crystal clear. "Command, this is Dunn. Canyon secure. Survivors are out." Commander Hale's voice cracked back through, stunned. "Dunn. Satellites are returning. We're seeing the area now. I don't know how you made it through that." Aria allowed herself a single steady breath as the hog climbed toward home. She said,
Simple, sir. The hog doesn't scare easy. The sun fully crested the horizon, casting the A-10's silhouette across the desert, proof that even when the world went dark, one pilot's eyes had never closed.